So, lately I've talked about, you know, anime in a sense, and one of the more recent audio videos I did, I talked about, why Utena in Revolutionary Girl Utena, or the adolescence of Utena, turns into a car because, I've heard people in other audio videos over the past that they did over the past year or so, and even, over in essay form online, kind of talk about, try to explain it. And they give some good explanations, basically saying, why, this scene occurs, even kind of agreeing with what the director's point of view was as well, as to why he went this direction. And they even, like I say, take it upon themselves to say, yeah, this is exactly why. This metaphor, or this, reversal of roles, a la the Sleeping Beauty story, makes sense, because, Utena, becomes the vehicle for Anthe to, basically, leave this fantasy world and go into the real world, I should say, and be her own and everything. And like I said, they make some good points and do some great jobs, and I highly recommend checking them out. All you have to do is type in Google Utena car, and you'll get a lot of stuff, not just for YouTube, but all across the board. But it also made me think about some other things. Now, another audio video I did before work was talking about, or asking the question, could Magical Girl transformations have been more? And, I gave some good examples of past, and even recent present examples of that being a fact. I mean, one of them that I do believe is true to that fact is Marvelous Mimlo. And the fact that the way she's a magical girl is she basically takes like these, two different pills in different patterns in different ways. And depending on how she takes them, she becomes whatever she needs to become. She either becomes older, shrinks down to an embryo and all that, and then kind of gets reborn into whatever form she needs, stuff like that. And the intro has her, basically showing, exactly, what she can do, what she's capable of doing when she takes these pills, like what she can become from like aging into an older version of herself to being these animals. And one of the last animals she becomes is a doe who kisses a male deer, a stag, if you will. Basically kind of indicating that, hey, in this form, there's a good chance that she could fall in love and, with, a fellow deer or stag and want to remain that way or something like that. And, you look at something like that and you're thinking, that's kind of weird that she'd want to do that. But you got to remember, in that form, she's basically taking on the instincts of that animal. So the instincts to, probably mate, if you will, are there, or to fall in love with a fellow deer animal, or whatever the same animal that she becomes of the opposite gender, is there. And, it just got me thinking and I've mentioned this before in several audio videos, how, Japan animation and even other animation overseas across the world can be a little bit more wilder, a little bit more different, a little bit more daring in what they present. And, and I kind of said, I think in some of those videos that I did years ago, that the same could be said for the U.S., that we're known to do that too. And it's kind of, we may not be as prevalent in that matter, but there are examples past and present and in the past several decades that prove that. I mean, for example, one of my personal favorites growing up as a kid is from the 1940s. Now, I wasn't born, I should say, in the 40s, but I was born in 1979, but still, one of my, favorite examples that got reran on Disney Channel and all that from the 40s is Duck Pimples. And everybody knows that Donald Duck cartoon is looked at as one of the most WTF, Donald Duck cartoons, or Disney Fab 6, Fab 5 cartoons that they've ever done, because all of a sudden, Donald on a rainy night is going through all these hallucinations and, his imagination is just going completely, off the wall, and it's taking it with him, or it's taking him with it, if you will. It's taking him with it. And one of the best examples that I see in that, in that short, is when Pauline, I think that's her name, or she has another name later on. She's given another name later on. I think it's called Colette or something like that, or Colleen or whatever. But basically Pauline, whatever you want to call her. One of the scenes in that short is she's looking for her pearls, right? Her necklace, her pearl necklace, and she thinks she finds them. And when she sees that just pearl handcuffs, that the detective or supposed detective has, instead of just looking around the house still, she decides to literally look under his jacket. She climbs under his jacket or his trench coat or his vest, whatever you want to call it, and she just remains there for like a couple of minutes. Like you see the silhouette of her, or not the silhouette, but you see kind of like the shape of her crawling under there, like two little big lumps, like two little mountains, and then they just settle down into like one little shape, like one little rounded shape that then, as the detective is, talking and moving, kind of flattens out, and like, she literally, becomes part of him, like she becomes one with him, because then as he's interrogating Donald, you see her hands pop up and she's taking off his hat and she's pouring out, and all the cigars that are in the hat are pouring out, and then she turns it over, pulls the rabbit out of hat, does the rabbit out of the hat trick, puts the rabbit back in, puts the hat back down, and then slides her hands back in. And then you would think, okay, wait a minute, she didn't find anything, she's going to crawl out, right? Nope. Instead, she remains in there for another few minutes, because when Donald doesn't give the detective what he wants, in an answer as to the whereabout of the pearls as well as the whereabout of the girl, because now he's noticing she's missing, not even realizing, oh, she's on my back, literally, or now she's part of me, if you will, because what happens next, as he's telling Donald, okay, I got a way to make you talk, you see her hand literally shoot out, her arm and her hand shoot out, go right next to his mouth while he's yelling for the guy, and then curling her finger like this along with his, kind of pantomiming what he's doing. And then when he takes the card from the guy that he calls for, as well as he puts on his his glasses, while he's holding the card and he's scratching his head, if you will, Pauline's hands come out, and one of them scratches his chin like this, like, it's an extra, like she's his new extra hands. And then the other, basically takes his glasses and puts it on him. And then, that's it. She just, has the hand on the chin and the other hands like that. And, he's just, and it remains that way until after he's finished reading the card. And then after he's finished reading the card, that, the camera zooms in, and then you see Pauline, finally outside of the jacket, if you will, before going back in just briefly and then popping her head back out and stuff. But I bring that up because that to me is a prime example even back then, of how weird animation here in the States could get, because, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to go that route. They didn't have to, do that scene even back then, but they did it. Another example of a cartoon back in the 40s and 50s and stuff that really made you wonder why they were even thinking about it. Like I was saying, another example of a cartoon that was created in that time frame between the 40s, 50s, 60s, and all that I watched in reruns was Popeye. And when I first saw this, it was in the Tom and Jerry Funhouse on Superstation WTBS, now just TBS. Excuse me. And the cartoon was Parlez, Vous, Woos. And this one's notable because everybody considers it has the most beautifully drawn olive oil design in history, at that time. But it's also notable for the fact that everything that got spoken to around Olive, would happen. You for example, the International, she was watching on television, he would say that the women's eyes were like limpet pools. She blinks and they become limpet pools. You know, and the way she would react to who she thought was the International, but was actually Bluto in disguise. It was typical of Olive's reaction sometimes in other cartoons, but it was a little bit more cartoony. Like there was something a little bit different in all that. And then of course came the ending. Of course came the ending where she literally melted into run, and I've said it before, running puddle of butter with just her eyes and a smile, and that's it. And when I mean a running puddle of butter, I mean literally she melts into a puddle of butter with just her face on there, smiling face, and she's running down the floor, or like water would cascade, flow down, steps, so it's slippery, like a slanted area, water and all that would flow down. That's basically what she did. And you're thinking, okay, that's funny and all, but what really made it stand out is as you watch it, all the way to the end, especially as it's fading to black, you see that she has like little dry spots appearing all over her now puddled form, including one right near her eye. And even though it still makes it funny and everything, it's like, whoa, just that small detail makes you go like, man, and it makes it look like, because even that small detail, what I'm trying to say to the viewer, makes it look like she's drying up, like literally the moment she like flows like down to her destination or wherever she's going to stop, she's just going to dry up and poof, that's it. But yeah, that's another example right there of how crazy cartoon animation, American animation can be when you have something like that. But you have to also go back to the 30s and the 20s. The old Betty Boop cartoons sometimes, or the old Betty Boop, the old Bosco cartoons, stuff like that. Mostly Betty Boop. Those were kind of like, sometimes the imagery there was like, and Doug Walker, nostalgia critic, who just recently brought back his Dark Toons series, the original intro and somewhat of the new intro kind of showcases a lot of this imagery, if you will, from that time frame, and shows you how weird and psychedelic, they would get, with the animations. I mean, you have, what's his name? You have that clown. I think his name is not Bozo, but Bosco the Clown, I think. You have him literally get turned into a ghost that now, as a ghost, he can, shapeshift into whatever he expresses. Whether it's a gold watch, turning his head into a bottle of booze, stuff like that. And they did, and it is understandable why they did that. They did it because of the fact that, he had, what was his name, Cap Calloway, singing, the song, basically, I think it was Cap Calloway doing the singing for that portion of the short. So, it made sense that since he was kind of like not only a good singer, but a good jazz singer and all that, but also a good dancer, that you want to mimic those movements. And what better way to do that than to have somebody, in a ghost form to do that? In other words, show more flexibility and visual representation of what they're talking about. But yeah, even back then, American animation was, definitely showed that it could be weird, but when you look at Japanese animation, you take a look at European animation as the years and decades went on, they definitely took the cake. Especially as you got into the more recent years, most recent, like, the 80s, like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s and all that. They took it up another level. There is no doubt about that. I mean, one of the movies I own is Mind Game, and I found out about this because I think there was a video people would say, there was a video people did, I think, not said, but that they put together, which was a compilation of a lot of WTF animation anime moments. And this one scene, particularly from Mind Game, was in there. And I'm thinking, what the hell is this? But it just shows you, how psychedelic and how crazy, even in recent years and decades, not just American animation, but all kinds of animation could get. Japan and Europe, Mexico, you name it, internationally can get. I mean, another movie I own, Paprika, that takes the cake in imagery. The Congress, which is a hybrid live-action animated film, like half live-action, half animated, with Robin Wright. The animation portions definitely, like, show you, that even nowadays, because I think those were done by an American animation studio, they can get crazy, they can get weird, they can get, like, mind warping, if you will, mind bending, if you will. And it's just really amazing to look at that and take it all in. It really is. And that brings me to the other thing I want to talk about, where, I feel, this is kind of the time where, nowadays I go on DeviantArt and I'm reading about, stories like Metamorphosized to Malleability. I'm reading webcomics called Morphica, or I'm reading, stories and, also looking at webcomics based on Mystic Makeover and the Demonica character, Veronica character. And I'm looking on all these, I'm looking on at all this creativity. And I'm like, holy crap. This kind of stuff could definitely benefit from being, visually seen, in some shape, form, or in some kind of shape or form, either as a webtoon on YouTube, Vimeo, wherever, or maybe someplace like, HBO Max or Netflix, or whatever the case may be. These kind of stories could benefit from it. They can. I mean, you want a good example of something like that, and I've mentioned this before. The Midnight Gospel. Look how crazy and whacked out that was on Netflix. It's like, you see all this and you're wondering, why? Why is there such a love now? Why is there such a love now, or more of an interest now, in this kind of animation style and storytelling, that goes along with it? Like, what is the interest to visually see these kind of stories brought to life? And I think it's because, honestly, this is just my opinion, and I've said this before, I think it's because they know with animation, the imagination of the mind is unlimited. So if you take something like a Metamorphosized to Malleability, or a Morphica series, or a Mystic Makeover series, and you apply it to animation, it just, and you apply it to animation and just let, the stories that you created be adapted loosely or to a T to, be represented in that animation, that it's unlimited. It's like an untapped potential just waiting to be unleashed among the world. I mean, you take a look at what Trouble TRO and Joven 16 over at Patreon and Neon DeviantArt do, and as well as Groblik and Lady Darsimer, on Echo's Portal and DeviantArt and and Patreon, you see what they in Gumroad, you see what they do, with their web stories, their web comics, or their written stories, and you read about how just out there they are, and you imagine in your mind how visually, how visually unique these could look, and it's like, I look back at, everything that I've mentioned, like with the Uchina situation, with Uchina becoming a car and how like out of this world and crazy that metaphor was, as well as the visual representations even before that, the visual metaphors before that in the movie. And then you take a look at Paprika, and then you take a look at what I've mentioned before, like with the past, even here in America, and then with back in Japan with mind games and all that. You take a look internationally, overall, and I think we are in a time now where animation, some may say it's not good, some may say it's not looking so well, that basically, some places like HBO Max and to an extent Netflix are trying to cut costs with them, but even with certain people not understanding the value of animation, and what it brings to the table, it's on a rise. It's doing more of the opposite of what people are looking at. People are looking at some of the doom and gloom because some of the shows that they were looking forward to or the fans of are now being canceled or being moved to other places. But but here's the thing: even though that is bad, that is unfortunate, animation's still on the rise. There's still an unlimited untapped potential for new animations, new ideas to be brought to the forefront. And I think when you look at the uniqueness, the psychedelicness, the just mind warping imageries that get put into animation over the past 20 years, 30 years, several decades, if you will, but mostly the past 20, 30 years, and even tap it back all the way to the time frame I talked about at the beginning. And then you combine with what you read, what people are piecing together in stories like, on DeviantArt and Echo's Portal and Fern Fedient and, fanfiction.net and all these other places, as well as the webcomics like The Mystic Makeover, The Morphicas, and all that, or the stories like The Metamorphosized Malleability and stuff like that. And it just shows you that we are now in a time frame where anybody could look at something like what I just mentioned and say, hey, that's perfect to be tapped for animation. Let me get you in contact with somebody. And they would get them in contact with somebody. I mean, even some of the more popular animes back in the day, like Battle of the Planets, some of the ways they would end their shows or their episodes here in America, even though we could tell there's a big difference from the original Japanese broadcast nowadays, thanks to the internet. Here in America, we'd always be reassured, oh, they'll be back to normal tomorrow and all that, and da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, okay, as a kid, we're thinking, oh, good, that's good to hear and everything, but yet we didn't know in Japan, basically them, going like this or doing this, that meant, oh, yep, they died, but they're going to be resurrected, or it's not going to be even considered canon or whatever. So, it's just, again, you just look at how crazy animation can be and, how certain stories can apply to that. And from an international standpoint, animation is on the rise, and I think it's all thanks to the fact that you have people out there with stories that they have written, with stories they've turned into webcomics that are so creatively LSD, psychedelic, tripping, trippy and all that, that once they get applied to animation in some form, it's what keeps people invested. It what keeps people interested and wanting to see more. So even though I can say Japan, has definitely, taken the cake when it comes to, just being out there, just visually, metaphorically, and all that, with their animation, they're not alone. Because as I've said before, other countries have done it, and mostly when you look back at our past as a country and animation, we've done it, and there's no denying that. There's no denying that whatsoever. So, you know, it's just really surprising when you sometimes see the trippiness of all that. I mean, again, I look at duck pimples as a good example, and the scene I explained there. I look at Parlez for Woos from Popeye, and I look at that, and it's like, and then even before that, the Betty Boop cartoons, like the one based on Snow White. It just shows you that even past and recent, present, and probably future, that the direction of animation isn't just the traditional classic animation that you've seen before, but the direction to really preserve animation is going to be found in the psychedelicness, in the trippiness, in the unusual, in the weirdness that the story it's based on brings to the table and helps allow it to bring to life visually, in my opinion. And again, that's why when I read, chapters like Metamorphosized, different chapters and shift of Metamorphosized Malleability, or I read new webcomics based on Morphica, or I read and look at new webcomics based on Demonica from Mystic Makeover. It just blows my mind to imagine what these would look like in animation form down the line. I mean, hell of a boss, depending on how much longer it's going to take till we get the next several episodes of the second season, who's to say none of those episodes won't be, relying on the trippiness and the craziness and all that of animation. I mean, season 1, no doubt, in my opinion, gave us an example of that, but who's to say season 2 won't take it a step further? You got FX, through Hulu and all that with that Little Demon show, and it's like, that has the potential, whether you're a fan of something like that or you're not, to go that route too, if not more so. So again, it definitely shows you that the future of animation, the future of animation is not just going to rely on the classic animation style that you can now also produce and bring to life masterfully in CGI and all that, but also it's going to rely on the psychedelicness, the weirdness, the trippiness of other animation projects based on stories that lend themselves to that avenue, in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Do you think, I'm just rambling here and not making any sense, or do you think I do have a point? That the future of animation, despite how you might feel about certain things going on right now, doesn't just rely on, massive old CGI movie presentations like what we get with Disney and DreamWorks, Illumination, and all them, but also is going to rely mostly on the weirdness, the LSD trippiness, psychedelicness of stories that from an animation that can lend themselves to that animation perspective and take them to that next level, thus allowing animation to thrive even further. What are your thoughts? Let me know down below. Comment if you like. Love to hear from each and every one of you on this whole scenario. What are your thoughts and everything? Comment below. Live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Check me out at my Teespring store. Also check me out at Venmo at Brian-Romer-2, at Cash App at BWRoses98. Check me out at Patreon at BWRoses. Also check me out at my podcast at BW Roses Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. Also check me out at DeviantArt.com at BVW1979 and at Vimeo at BW Roses. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Do you think I got a point, or do you think I'm just rambling? Let me know down below, and until then, Y'all have a good day, and I'm out.